All right, so now we're going to move into this section called indications of time. Uh, Look, warning a person about an event, but giving them no indication as to when this event will occur is pointless. You know, if someone said that you had heart problems and you were warned this by your doctor, this matters to you and your life specifically. Sometime inside your lifetime, this event might happen. Thus, I am warning you about it. You know, a tornado warning matters because it's happening right now. Giving a person an indication as to when an event will occur, but meaning that the event is going to happen thousands of years from now, it's pointless. There's no purpose in that. And my argument, generally speaking, honestly, is that the Bible did not do this. It did not intend for every person that ever read this text to wonder if they themselves are living at the end of time. The end of time was happening to the people it was written to. You're reading a record. The day of the Lord referred to in the New Testament is a day that is happening in the immediate future of the initial hearers, not in the indefinite future, perhaps thousands of years from when these words were spoken. If the indication of time given in the New Testament are taken seriously, we must admit that this event happened in the past, or that the authors are not inspired, or that the translations are so poor they're useless in understanding the end of days. So we will dig into this promptly. By just looking at many verses, I think it's usually good enough. So Matthew 10:21. Now, brother will deliver up brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but he who endures to the end will be saved. When they persecute you in this city, flee to another. For assuredly I say to you, you will not have gone through the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. Very simply stated, I've looked at this passage many times, discussed this passage with many individuals. If the Son of Man has not arrived, then the gospel has not been even preached to the cities of Israel, which of course is absolute baloney because we live in America and we know the gospel, and Paul wrote to churches in Rome, not to mention traveled all over the world. You know, phrases like this are really what started to give me pause regarding the day of the Lord. If I am looking at this passage and I am trying to understand when the day of the Lord will happen by what the text says, the Son of Man already returned 2,000 years ago. There's not another way to really take the passage. I've actually, I've sat in a church and actually heard pastors preach, more than one pastor preach on this exact passage. And they'll actually ask the question, has the Son of Man come? And I often would think that that's a very funny question to ask, because the answer, according to what the text says, you will not have gone through the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. They would not even complete the task of going through Israel before he came back. This, of course, implies that he would come back in their own lifetime, meaning that he already came back and he already did this. But, of course, our theology requires the Son of Man to come in the future, and that we are living in the last days and that we might see it, even though the text says that he had to have come back in their lifetime. And there's many, many indications just like this. Here's a good one here in 1 Corinthians 10:7. Do not become idolaters, as were some of them, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Nor let us commit sexual immorality, as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 fell. Nor let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted and were destroyed by serpents, nor complain, as some of them also complained and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Very peculiar. Paul is clearly making a direct reference to the Old Testament, specifically the accounts in Exodus. Really, I think about Exodus 32. All these things, as it says here in verse 11, now all these things happened to them as examples. They were happening to the people in the Old Testament as examples, or even as types, you could say. And they were written for our admonition. Our, of course, is Paul, as well as the Corinthians. I often say that a lot of the end of time can be solved by a very simple question, which is, who is you, or who is they, or who is them, or who is our, or who is their, who is us, who is we. These very simple questions that I sum up as, who is you, will answer the end of time. And when you ask this question as you go through passages, you'll find that the event is happening to the people it is written to. So here Paul puts himself along with the people living in his day as living at the end of the world. Ages is the Greek word aeon, which can also be translated world, and is 38 times in the New Testament, as we've already seen. Here's one of my personal favorites, one of the many very curious ones. Little children, it is the last hour, and as you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have come, by which we know that it is the last hour. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have continued with us. But they went out that they might be made manifest that none of them were of us. Who is us? What does a person say? John and the recipient of this letter live at the same time. No real fight there. That time is the end of time. It's the last hour, and they know it. I actually was sitting once watching a pastor talk about this very passage. I was watching this, I think, online. I think it was about a year ago, last summer for sure. And the pastor read this passage, and he actually stopped and said, it's very peculiar that he says it's the last hour. Can you imagine? He thought it was the last hour then, and instead of letting the reality of that situation sink in, which is that he lives at the end of time 2,000 years ago, meaning that you cannot, he picked up and said, if it was the last hour then, it's the last millisecond now. Total craziness. The passage clearly says that it is the last hour when John wrote it. He even goes on to say that he knows it is the last hour. Which of course means that the event already happened. This was written, nearly 2,000 years ago. The idea that it's the last hour then, but time is up now, 2,000 years later, essentially means that John has no idea what he's talking about. I recently watched I think you would call it a weather compilation film by Seventh Vial, a very popular YouTuber. He shows the weather anomalies taking place around the world, and he ties them as to being signs of the end of time. Total fanaticism, very emotionally gripping, which is the goal of pretty much everyone discussing the end of time, I would say. But he even included, I think the title of the video was "The Hour is Late." And the very first audio on the video is a guy saying, the time is near. This, of course, is amazingly strange, extremely peculiar. It would be comical if it wasn't such a large part of my actual life that such a conclusion could be drawn. You clearly lifted that very phrase, the time is near, it is the last hour, or the hour is late. That very theme exists all throughout the New Testament, which of course was written 2,000 years ago, meaning that the time was late then. The time can't be late then and also late now. Here's Matthew 16:26. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will reward each according to his works. Assuredly, I say to you, there are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So, if the Son of Man has not come, that would mean that there are people that are 2,000 years old today. How else does a person read a passage like this? I actually I guess I can put a lot of my own personal stories in here. It doesn't really matter, I suppose. I once had a long conversation over this very passage. This is probably about 3-4 years ago with several people, all of which are Bible folks. I mean, they're guys that can go to the Word and show you all sorts of things. They know their Bibles very well. We all agreed that the Son of Man had not returned. However, reading this passage, it was very clear to us that there was then people that are 2,000 years old today. We then speculated for at least, it's got to have been close to an hour, about how it was possible if the Son of Man had not returned, but there were people that had not died. And we actually came to the conclusion that the people that Jesus is speaking to, many of his own disciples really, were stuck in some sort of time suspension, perhaps being sealed deep inside the caves of the earth. I'm not kidding about this conversation. This was a serious and real conversation. And we believe that with the many earthquakes that are shown in Revelation, that they would be released from this time suspension, and thus fulfilling what Jesus said. Totally ridiculous. I mean, amazing to really consider. But the reality is that this is, once again, out of the words of Jesus, out of the mouth of Jesus. He says specifically that some of them standing here, that would be standing where they are currently when he said this, they would not taste death before the Son of Man came back in his kingdom. That means the event happened in their life. And once again, if I am going through New Testament references regarding the coming of the Son of Man and trying to piece together when it is that he is supposed to return, there's no other conclusion to come to. He came back in the first century, or he lied. It's not, or it's translated so poor that you're hopeless to understand it. I do not think that's the case. I think Jesus is the Messiah. I don't think he was a liar, and I don't think he was wrong. He came back in the first century before everyone who heard him say those words died, meaning that Revelation and the end of time and the coming of the Son of Man, the establishment of the kingdom, everything that you're putting forward as being happening in your days now happened back then. You live in the kingdom currently. Here is Revelation 1, 1 through 3. Very, very interesting passage in Revelation. So the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants things which must shortly take place, and he sent and signified it by his angel to his servant John, who bore witness to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ, to all things that he saw. Blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of this prophecy and keep those things which are written in it, for the time is near. So here at the opening of Revelation, the events contained in the rest of the letter are identified as being seen by John, happening in a short time, and being near, which of course is impossible if the letter is awaiting fulfillment today in 2016. I've often referred to these first 3 verses in Revelation as being the most confusing introduction to a letter that is said to have never happened. This letter literally says that the elements contained inside of it are going to take place shortly, and that the events are near. Now, how's an event that is quickly to take place and near happening have not happened in 2,000 years? I mean, can anyone answer that question? The only way to answer it, of course, would be to take that what means shortly taking place actually means long, and what is near is actually far away, that God is just having a difficulty relating his timing to man. And of course, I reject that entirely. If an individual will skip over all the detail of Revelation, all the endless things that people want to attach strong significance to, if you will just jump over the entirety of the letter, read it like a letter for even, and look at the end of Revelation 22, you'll see the exact same warning is provided. Then he said to me, these words are faithful and true. The Lord God of the holy prophets sent his angel to show his servants things which must shortly take place. The exact same thing it said in the beginning of the letter. Behold, I am coming quickly. So again, the event is described as happening in a short time and coming quickly. So here at the end of Revelation, the contents of the letter are said to be coming shortly as well as quickly. I mean, you would have to, I sometimes think about how funny this situation really is. You mean to tell me that an individual received this letter sometime in the first century? They read this letter and they were supposed to be able to come to the conclusion that this was discussing an event that was going to happen in 2,000 years or further in the future? How would you ever come to that conclusion? In Revelation 22, in particular, there's about half a dozen times he says the event is coming quickly or speedily or swiftly. And at the beginning of the letter, as we just saw, it says the same thing. Inside the contents of the letter, it's even described as happening quickly. It's not possible. It's just not. It's not a possibility. It can't be both. It can't be shortly coming but actually be long. It can't be quickly coming but actually be greatly delayed. It's just not. It's not possible. Here's a very, very peculiar one. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verses 2 through 7. And this probably should have included verse 8, but this will work. We are bound to thank God always for you. So first off, who's we? We is the writer of the letter. If you notice, this letter is written by Paul, Silas, and Timothy. So when it says we right here, it means we, the writers of the letter. They, then, we, are bound to thank God always for you. Key question, ask it all the time. Who is you? Well, you, according to this, is actually the Thessalonians. So the Thessalonians are the you. The we is the people who wrote it. So we are bound to thank God always for you, Thessalonians, brethren, as it is fitting, because your, the Thessalonians, faith grows exceedingly, and the love of every one of you, the Thessalonians, all abounds towards each other, so that we, that would be Paul, Silas, and Timothy, we ourselves boast of you, that would be the Thessalonians, amongst the churches of God, for your, the Thessalonians, patience, and fear in all your, the Thessalonians, persecutions, and tribulations that you, Thessalonians, endure, which is manifest evidence of the righteous judgment of God, that you, Thessalonians, may be counted worthy of the kingdom of God, for which you, Thessalonians, also suffer, since it is a righteous thing with God to repay with tribulation those who trouble you, Thessalonians, and to give you, Thessalonians, who are troubled, rest with us. Us would be the people who wrote the letter, Paul, Silas, and Timothy, when the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven with his mighty angels. Very, very, very peculiar. The Messiah either came and relieved the Thessalonians of what's described here as being a tribulation, a persecution of them that was happening. He either came and relieved the Thessalonians of this, or Paul does not know what he is talking about, or he's flat out lying, really. This coming is similar described in Matthew 16:27, coming out of the sky, if you will, coming with his mighty angels. Similar described in Matthew 16:27 and 28. And in that account, it's said to happen before all who heard the message died. He said, some of you standing here will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. I mean, it's the exact same, very, very similarly described coming. And in both of those accounts, Matthew 16, as well as here in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, the coming is referred to happening to them in the first century. Again, come on. Lining out what it says, there's no other way to take it. The Thessalonians are either currently being persecuted today in 2016, thus they've lived for 2,000 years, or and are still suffering, or God came and saved them from the tribulation that they were currently going through. There's not a lot of ways to take it. Here is Daniel 8:26. And the reason I included this is that a lot of times people will say to me when I bring up the references regarding the indication of time, especially those in Revelation, I'll find people will say, well, a day with the Lord is like 1,000 years. And they somehow feel very comfortable saying this as if it's an established fact. It's not. That's a sliver of a psalm that's being taken and used as a foundational doctrine text. If you examine the psalm, as well as where it's being used by Peter, you'll see he actually means the opposite of it being a long time. But nonetheless, here in Daniel 8:26, the vision of the evening and the morning which was told is true. Wherefore, shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. So here Daniel has received a vision regarding an event, an end-time event, and the vision needs to be sealed because it's for such a long time that there's no need to unseal it. So here, we see an end-time prophecy given to Daniel that is said to be for many days, or in other words, a long time. I'm putting forth that the end of time was in 70 AD, but this prophecy was given nearly 500 years before that event, which is indeed a long time. Thus we can conclude that God can relate his timing to man. 1,000 years may be like a day to the Lord, but he is well aware that is not the case with his creation man. When God says short, he means short. When he means long, he means long. Take that verse that's in your mind, Daniel 8:26, the sealing of the prophecy because the days are long, and notice here again in Revelation 22:10, and he said to me, do not seal the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand. Remarkable. Basically the exact same thing that was told to Daniel is said to be done in an opposite fashion. The time is so close, don't seal it. So you see, God is relating his time appropriately in Revelation. He is not saying that the time is near, but it actually is long. It's so close that it's at hand. So here we see John being told the exact opposite of what was said to Daniel. And once again, the time is said to be near. This serves as evidence that God knows how to tell time and how to relate his timing to man. In Daniel's day, the end of the world, the end time event was far off. But in John's day, the end of the world is so near that it's at hand. I even went and broke down this word at hand About a year ago, I found this word as being very, very peculiar because it itself implies imminency. It's not used too many times, about 30 times throughout the New Testament. This Greek word aegis and the various versions of it, nigh, at hand, near, close to. The idea that a phrase like that could be used and he actually means a long time, ludicrous. If that's what it is, then forget about it. This is not even a mildly worthwhile pursuit because there's no way to come to an understanding. Even phrases like "for the time is at hand" mean the opposite by a large margin. If we're to take the futurist stance, what else does a person say? So, if the indications of time presented in the previous verses are being taken seriously, one must either admit that the end of time happened, or that the text is so poorly translated that no understanding regarding the end of time can be ascertained. Jesus told his disciples the event would happen in their life on more than one occasion. So naturally, the apostles preached that the end of the world was happening in a short time. Simply put, if that event did not happen in the distant past, nobody in the New Testament, including Jesus, know what they're talking about. If the New Testament is true, then the event happened, and we today are so disconnected from the author's understanding of the end of time that we no longer understand the event at all. And that's actually what the problem is. The end of time event that they're describing is a localized catastrophe taking place in Jerusalem, and was the passage from the age of when sacrifices and whatnot were being done to a time where those no longer necessary. This is a very simple way of saying it. That age ended. If you don't believe me, look around. No sacrifice has been done for 2,000 years. You think that order is going to be restored and then destroyed again? No, the order was destroyed, just like they prophesied. It's over. You live in the new heaven and new earth right now.